Okay, thank you. This is so great to be back in person here again. My name is Mark Fretz. I am in the Department of Architecture at the University of Oregon and in our Energy Studies and Buildings lab in Portland. So by now we all realize that we have a climate change issue that we need to solve, and that means reducing carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere quickly. Buildings are a big part of that carbon dioxide issue, and therefore they're also a big part of the solution. It also turns out that on the West Coast in particular, we have a seismic issue to deal with as part of one of the other things to deal with: pandemic, climate, seismic. And when you look at the energy usage on the West Coast, climate zones 4 and 5 in particular, and 6, could use some deep energy retrofits to help save energy in buildings. They also tend to overlay with the Cascadia subduction zone, which you see on that image. So the two projects that I want to talk about today, we are calling Forest to Facade. And the idea is to use bio-based products, so mass timber panels, to retrofit buildings for better energy consumption and at the same time, seismic resilience. So taking small trees and turning them into big panels and then doing multiple things at once with these. This first project is focused on multifamily facade retrofits. We've got a great collaboration between OSU and U of O. Professor Andre Barbosa and PhD student Fernando Orozco are doing the seismic design on this project. And we have a very long team here on the University of Oregon side. And then, of course, Tallwood, Phil Mann and Mark Garrick have been really influential in this project, helping us actually do a physical mock-up, which you'll probably see if you go to Emerson. And then we've had really great support from industry for this project. So a lot of housing around here you've seen, and this is ubiquitous housing, multifamily housing, 1 to 3 stories. A lot of it was built between 1960 and 1994, before current seismic and energy codes. And 88% of multifamily is actually in this 1 to 3 stories in the Pacific Northwest, according to NEA's building stock assessment. 64.7% of that has 2x4 exterior wall construction, and 64% of that is R8 to R12 wall insulation. So there's a lot of opportunity to improve operational energy in these buildings, doing deep energy retrofits, as well as seismic issues. You see a lot of soft story buildings in these images here. So I'm not going to go through everything we've done. There's a lot of analysis that has gone into the panel design, but what I want to talk about is just kind of this workflow on this retrofit project. This is a case study building in Portland that we looked at. It's 2 stories. It's got a 1971 vintage and 28 units. And you'll see that there are some panels here highlighted in orange and yellow that are the orange ones are the seismic shear panels, and then the yellow ones, the infill window panel. That's the area that we focused on in a mock-up at Emerson Lab over the last 2 years. And by the way, I didn't mention that this project was generously supported by the U.S. Forest Service 2020 Wood Innovations Grant, and Tallwood has provided support for this project as well. So the digital workflow was interesting for us. This is built on what's called Energiesprong out of the Netherlands. It's a program in Holland that was started to scan existing buildings and basically add a new facade over the existing facade while keeping occupants in their homes. So, the idea is that this can be all produced off-site in a panelized fashion, brought on site and done within a week. And at the same time in Holland, they're doing energy, so HVAC upgrades and solar panel installation with the facade system. So to begin, we scan the existing building. This is a mock-up of a 1-story portion of that building where I showed the panels. Although what you'll see coming up is actually sized, the connectors are sized for 2-story. We did it in a 1-story version, but you scan the existing building. This is using Artec Ray scanner, and we've tried a few other scanners. Leica was another one we tried. This Artec Ray scanner was provided by Hawk Ridge Systems, and it seemed to be the best one for large objects such as buildings, as well as the software package that they have worked well with Autodesk products. So we ended up using that and then processed these scans and a workflow that brings multiple scans together into one model. And the issue with the scans is you get a lot of information in them in these point clouds. So trying to understand what to use and what not to use is really important as you think about what's in plane and out of plane to develop the panel. So that was a big challenge. Things like gutters and reflective elements can produce some kind of wonky parts to the model. And here you see that the multiple model scans get kind of articulated together and then merged into one model that's ultimately the one we use. So we then take the models that we design, the panels that we design, and then fabricate them offsite. This is Phil Mann in the Emerson shop. This is at actual speed. I'm going to zoom it up here in a second. You can see we're doing some CNC processing, and we tried to really see how much we could adapt some irregularities in the existing construction to our fabrication. So that's why you're seeing kind of this line that's not straight, because we were trying to make some adaptations and see what the tolerances were between the digital model and the CNC cuts and then the physical model. We also tried some wood insulation. This is Styco rigid board insulation product. It's from Germany. Unfortunately, there's nothing produced here in Oregon. We hope that one day there will be something. If anybody out here wants to start a factory to produce wood fiber insulation, that would be amazing. But we thought we'd try to see how this milled together with the MPP. So we bonded this to the MPP and then did some test mills. It does really, really well, actually very clean milling. And so that is one thing we tested. And then you see the layup here of these panels. So these are done horizontally, very nice, elevated, easy on your back compared to doing this in the field in a vertical application. And we use the wood fiber insulation. You can get varying thicknesses of this, so you can go from just getting the building up to code all the way up to passive house standards, depending on how much retrofit performance you're trying to get. We originally planned on using rock wool insulation and then switched this out at the end when we got a donation of this product. So the weather barrier is right now up against the MPP, but would otherwise be on the top of the insulation if we use this wood product. So in the field, as these panels are getting fabricated, the next step would be to remove the eave. In our case, you can, and there's some rigging that you can use that actually can leave the eave in place and get this underneath. But we decided for a design aesthetic to have a little tauter eave than was on the existing building. This is my colleague Jason Stinson out there removing the eave. And you can also retrofit roof systems with PV panels at the same time, but we didn't do that as part of this research scope. So we're removing the eave and the window, and then we're installing what we're calling an MPP transfer joist spacer that allows us to tie the roof and the floor diaphragms together, and then allow space for insulation behind the panel to be right up against our existing T111, and then run PEX piping for hydronic systems behind that panel. It also provides a convenient point to tie in the panels at the edge when we bring them out into the field. So here are the panels in the shop. We tried to reuse some existing wood to give it a little bit more texture on the facade. So there you see some reused wood on the facade, and these panels get hoisted and we bring them out. We start with the window panel first to make sure that the rough opening aligns with our window, and then we're using a 1/4 inch tolerance between these panels as we bring the others out. So this is not the shear panel, this is our window panel, and we fasten it at the edges in these zones that we leave exposed. And I think it's raining here. We actually did some moisture analysis on these panel systems. Dale Northcutt in our lab looked at some WUFI analysis and mold growth analysis to make sure that even if these start off at high moisture content, they would dry out over the next 2 years and not create a mold issue, which they seem to do really well in the analysis we did. So sometimes that happens that the weather is like this. We actually built this mock-up, the existing mock-up, I think the hottest week of the year. So we chose all the worst weather to come do this in. And then we have these panel joints to close afterwards. So the panel joints are left open for the hoisting and for mounting. And then we came back and filled the seams and closed it with weather barrier and our rigid insulation over that and batten, and then final cladding. So that's kind of the process for the closing the joints and then coming back and adding blocking and completing the roofing was that next step. So here you can see that. And again, if we did the roofing as a retrofit, we wouldn't be doing this, but this is just focusing on the walls. So there's the final mock-up. And on the left image, you can see the kind of the reflected section of that assembly. You can see we used a wood bat fiber insulation behind the MPP, which allowed us to have some compressibility against the T111, and then the rigid wood fiber insulation. And then, of course, the long seismic connector, which is sized for a 2-story application, although we ended up just doing the 1-story piece. So that's the multifamily residential project, but we're now going to move this into commercial low-rise facade retrofits. This is funded generously by a 2022 USDA ARS Tallwood grant. And it's basically the same research team, but we're going to add William Silva from Swinnerton to the team, who is going to help us with a lot of issues around constructability and costing. So we're really excited to have William join the team for this project. We have, you know, commercial retrofits can be pretty invasive, and they're oftentimes, and they involve substantial material waste and embodied carbon issues, along with business disruption and displacement of the workplace. So what we'd like to do is see if we can address these retrofits by also adding the deep energy retrofit piece of this project, and opportunities for kind of changing the design or updating design on older buildings, improving daylighting when we remove the facade, and improving the whole project through embodied carbon, reduce embodied carbon. We have a case study building here in the Pacific Northwest that we're going to be using for this project. It's actually undergoing a more conventional retrofit, but we want to use that as a baseline to make the comparison for the project. And the outcome for this one, we won't have a mock-up for this project, but the outcome will be a structural analysis and sizing. We'll develop connections that we need for this project, and we'll do a facade thermal and moisture performance analysis, look at typical construction details, construction optimization, as well as embodied carbon and cost estimation for the proposal versus the baseline on this case study building. So we're really excited to start this. This is actually starting officially coming up this next month, although we've been doing some pre-work on this project. So look forward to hearing more soon about this project. Finally, the third one I want to mention is a project that we're calling Carbon Narratives for Design Planning. This was also funded by a 2020 USDA ARS Tallwood grant. We really wanted to do this project when we originally proposed it as a workshop and conference to get a lot of stakeholders in the room to talk about structural materials and the stories around their carbon content. Unfortunately, the pandemic hit right after we were awarded this, and we had to shift gears and go to a virtual format. So what we ended up doing at the very beginning, we did a survey to architects, engineers, contractors, nonprofits, academics, manufacturers, and government representatives to frame the most relevant questions they had about carbon and structural materials and allow us to structure the workshops. We had 305 responses in that survey, 180 of which were from the AEC community. And that allowed us then, together with Quorum, who supported us for this project, to frame 5 workshops, one on forestry certifications, one on forestry method and ecological services. So beyond just carbon accounting. The third one is on comparing concrete, steel, and mass timber. And then we did an LCA methodologies and assumptions workshop, and finally designing for a building end of life. And this format allowed us to get in a whole range of speakers from around the world. And these workshops are on our website. I'll show you that address here in 1 second. The last piece of this is we're creating a design field guide that will review best available scientific literature on these topics and put it out in a more graphic kind of interface for users. So that's ongoing. These workshops are, again, on the website that we have, buildhealth.uoregon.edu, also the netzedlab.uoregon.edu. Both of those sites are hosting these, and you can go and watch these workshops at your leisure. So thank you very much. And I'll pass it off to Judith, who will talk a little bit more about some other applications for these panelized systems.